and I lost my father when I was 12 years old. It was a sudden death, and it was extremely painful.
Kia ora. Hello. Welcome back. This is the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we talk about all the amazing topics around life, death, experiences in between, what it means to die, what it means to truly live. And I'm excited today by our guest. Today I'm having a conversation with Ligia Houben, who is all about death, dying, navigating grief, and truly living. She is the creator of the 11 Principles of Transformation. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into that conversation. Ligia helps people to move through loss and find hope and healing in some of life's toughest moments. She has a compassionate approach, and she combines practical tools alongside with spirituality, psychology, and helping people to find life after life's darkest moments. So if you're experiencing grief, we talk a lot about death on the podcast. We don't necessarily talk about grief, but as we will get into, I believe that grief is very, very important. So if you're experiencing that, hang in there, have a listen to this conversation. If you've got loved ones who are maybe going through something and you want to know how to support them a bit better, then I think the conversation today is probably for all of us. So let's get into it. So Ligia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really, really interested to hear more about your work. How did you end up in this place where you're talking about death and grief and loss?
Thank you, Kirsty. This is an honor to be with you and to be sharing something that is so close to my heart. Because to talk about actually, yes, death and dying, grief, it's something that is so sacred that's why when I do this, I do it with all my love. And the reason that I got into this world of helping the bereaved, it's because I lost my father as I was, I was telling you that I'm from Nicaragua, and I lost my father when I was 12 years old. We were living in Nicaragua. It was a sudden death, unexpected, sudden death, and it was extremely painful for me. It was, so painful that at times I did not know how could I, continue living without him and all that. And it was very special to have the love of my family, my mom, my sisters. I'm the youngest of three. So I learned how to live, with that loss. And then what was something that impacted me tremendously was when I was studying psychology at the University of Miami. There was this course that was actually in the religious studies department called Death and Dying. I was so interested in taking that course, Kirsty, that it was like a magnet. So I actually added another major, and I did it on religious studies as well because I really wanted to take the course. And when I started taking that class, I realized that, yes, I had accepted my father's death intellectually, however, not emotionally, because I have never really, and this was years after he had died, but I had not really faced talking about death, talking about grief, and all that. So it's when I realized that, yes, it's so important to acknowledge grief, to validate it. And that's when I made that decision that I wanted to do this, my mission in life, to help the bereaved, the griever. So to do something about what has happened to us.
It's so, so important, isn't it? I think so many of us are taught from a young age that grief, we've got to get over it quickly. We've got to bury the grief, just get back up on our feet, carry on as if life was normal. But grief is important because, like you've talked about the emotional piece, it allows us to process so much. And if we don't process that, we just push it away, which is what we're taught to do, to hurry up and get through it. I think it sort of sits inside somewhere and it almost festers. I think it becomes this big, ugly thing, which makes the loss harder. Do you think that's fair to say that if we don't grieve, it can come back later and be harder?
I totally agree with what you said, totally. Because the thing is, that we live in a society that is basically death denial society.
Mm.
And we don't want to talk about it because after, I took that class and I graduated and all those things, I became a thanatologist with it. It's a person specialized in death and dying. Comes from the word thanatos, which is death in Greek. So, and you must know about this, of course,
I
because
do,
this
yeah,
is your
but for
topic.
our
I
listeners,
know.
yep.
Yeah, but I like to say it because not many people know. So I became a thanatologist and I actually ended up teaching death and dying at Florida, at the university here, Florida International University. And I remember that I would talk, with my students, and they would say that when they shared, with their family or with their friends, that they were going to take a class on death and dying, people would tell them, death and dying, and why? Why are you
Yeah.
going to take that, such a depressing course?
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. But the thing is that it happens to all of us. And
Yep.
unless we have the conversation, it's going to always stay there as a taboo. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll say it again. I've said this so many times on our show. None of us are getting out of here alive. 100% death rate, like I promise you. And yet we don't talk about it. We had a recent study here in New Zealand, which was run by the Public Trust, which is they look after a lot of affairs, family
Uh-huh.
affairs, and they're the people that can hold your will, and you go to them for many, many things. They did a survey and found that 50, I believe it's 57% of people within their survey results don't want to acknowledge, talk, discuss, even don't think about death. It's just something over there. So that is a lot. That's more than 50% of us. And
Well,
yeah, I find that really sad because 100% death rate, none of us are getting out of here alive. None of us.
none
So
of us.
I'm curious to know, Lahir, when you talk about you went and you were teaching death and dying, what do you teach? Have you ever had someone say, well, what qualifies you to teach about this? Because none of us,
Well,
well, apart from near-death experiences, none of us have died.
as I shared with you, and I am not teaching that right now because I have dedicated more into, writing, the books and all that.
Yeah, yeah.
But when I did it, well, I am a thanatologist, as I told you, and I specialize in that topic because I like to address it, in a it's like a sociological aspect to talk about how we see it in society, to compare with different societies as well, and also to talk about near death experience, to talk about the afterlife, to talk about how our beliefs, have a great influence on how we see death, to see,
Mm,
death in children, adolescents, adults, older adults, so it's a whole spectrum that how we see life, and how we see death. It's like an umbrella, no? And the way I taught the course, because I taught it for FIU, for International University for several terms. And then I taught it online for almost 11 years for Kaplan University, which now
mhm,
is Purdue. And I love teaching it also online. And the thing is that the way I taught the course was with the intention to appreciate life.
mm,
That's why I love your program, your podcast, because yes, it's about that, and sometimes people don't realize that the more we take into that sense of, yes, we are going to die, our loved ones are going to die, we would live more meaningful. That's how I feel, because
mm,
we wouldn't waste so much time, fighting or getting upset and all these things. What for?
mm,
So
mm,
that's why I love to teach that way my course. I would tell my students, especially the one at FIU, the course, every single week, because it was a 3 hours course. I would always tell them that, on that week, because we're talking about the four most important things. There is a beautiful book by Ira Byock. He's an palliative care doctor that specializes, in hospice care.
mm,
And he did a study with dying patients, and what are the things that the patients wish they said more, before they were
Mm.
dying, And they said, I love you, thank you, forgive me, and I forgive you. So I shared that with my students very early when we started, the course. And every single week, I would tell them, okay, so remember this week to say more, thank you, forgive me, forgive, and I love you. And they will come back, the following week, and they will say, Professor Houben, I did this, I thanked this, I forgave this. So it was about that, focusing on life, on love, on gratitude, on forgiveness, to add more purpose to life.
Oh, I just love it. I love it. I feel so connected to what you're saying because this is what we need to do. And none of us are living the perfect life. So if we know where there's conflict or something that needs to be resolved, like you said, why would we be fighting with our loved ones or, making the most out of our moments? I think if there's something there, we should pursue it and go and make up relationships or even the relationships which are great. Let's make them better. I spoke to a guest recently and she was talking about writing letters to people so that when she died, there would be letters available for them. I find that hard because if I write a letter for somebody, I want to give it to them straight away.
Uh-huh.
But you could totally do that. Leave something. She was talking about building legacy. And it was a fabulous conversation, leaving your legacy, because we all have a legacy regardless of whether we intend to or not. It just happens by default. It's just something that people will remember us in some way for some time. But actually, I think if we can do what you're saying and connect with this idea that we're dying, we can truly get more out of relationships and more out of life and show up better for the things that are important.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
really, really like this. So, sorry, what were those four things? To say I love
Yes,
you, that's the main one I got.
I
Um,
know, right? I
Thank
love
you.
you, thank you, forgive me, and I forgive you.
Yeah, gosh, that
So
is
it's asking
so
for
powerful.
forgiveness, but also sometimes, we're humans, right? We make mistakes. We say things that we may not have wanted to say or do
Oh, yeah.
things. So to ask for forgiveness, that is so beautiful because it
Yeah.
shows that we are humans. It shows that we are vulnerable, and it is beautiful to be able to be vulnerable.
Oh, I really think so. I think it's for so long it's been seen as a weakness, but it's not
I know.
because, yeah, I don't know. It's just not. It's not at all. There's a question. I work with quite a few groups and I do different conversation things. And the question I love is, if you knew you were going to die today, how would that change the rest of the hours in this day? How would that change the way that you act? Who would you talk to? What food would you eat? And there's no right or wrong because some people are like, I'm just going to go all out and have all of those enjoyment factors and really just have a good time. No, I totally understand that. And then others are like, well, there's more important things for me because I need to go and spend time with people. Some people said I wouldn't go see my family because it would be too painful. And that
Mm,
took me back, and I was really challenged by that. Other
wow.
people would go and spend as much time with as many people as possible. So there's no correct way to do death. But I think
Wow.
if we can be thinking about that, so I'm going to ask our listeners, if you were to die today, would you be okay with that? Or are there things unresolved? Is there things you want to do?
Very
I'm going to leave it
profound
there. Yeah.
question.
Well, it
Very
is. It's quite a
profound.
deep
And
one.
you
Yeah.
know what? I am so, and I can say the word happy to say this because it's something that I like to journal. I like to journal a
Yeah.
lot. And it's something that I have journaled about. And I can tell you from my heart that I am okay if I die today because I feel that I have my mission, I have lived my mission. And especially, and this is sharing, no? I was very close to my parents. I was
Yeah.
blessed with my parents. And as I said before, I lost my father when I was 12. And then 4 years ago, I lost my beloved mother my centenarian. She was almost 101,
Oh,
Kirsty.
wow. This is
Yes,
so
and she
good.
was, I know, she was adorable. And the thing I did, because I honor them so much,
Mm,
I wrote a book about my father's life. I
yeah.
wrote a book about my mother's life. And for them, like my first grief book, I dedicated it to my father's memory, Transform Your Loss, Your Guide to Strength and Hope. And my latest book, dedicated and inspired by my mother's death and to help the bereaved and to validate the bereaved. And it's called Allow Me to Live My Grief and Heal from the Inside Out.
Mm,
So I have, and I created the 11 principles, you mentioned them before. So I think about all that. And I love my family. I express a lot of love, sometimes a lot, I
yeah.
do. I love to be grateful, and I am okay asking for forgiveness, and I love to forgive. So I do. I can say with my heart that in that aspect, I'm okay because I feel peace in my heart.
Yeah.
That I want to
Yeah.
die right now, not really because I want to do more.
Yeah.
However, because of that love that I feel for my family, for people, people are amazing. I love people, and I'm like, you know, I have peace in my heart. That's what I can say. You took me off,
Yeah.
with a question, but that's how I
Yep.
feel. Yeah.
No, no, and thank you for sharing that. I feel very similar. I am by no means ready to go because I talk about squeezing the juice out of life, which relates all into this. I am by no means ready to go, but if I did go, then I'm okay with that. I'm okay. I just
Beautiful.
worry about my family and leaving things behind. But
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Before you ask me, and I would love, for you to share with me in a personal way, because I know that you do what you do based on your personal experience. And I would love to hear that from you, from with your words. I would love to hear that. I was so interested when I read about it.
so are we talking about my experiences with death, physical death, or about my own
And
near-death
with
experience?
near-death experience, yes.
My near-death
The
experience.
near-death
Okay.
experience.
Yeah, because they're all very closely related. I've had, I wouldn't say a lot of death in my life. I know a lot of people who have had multiple, but I've had some very significant people in my life who have died, and
Uh-huh.
those deaths have really impacted me and led me towards the work that I'm doing. But my own
Uh-huh.
experience was I was 12 years old, and listeners, I'm just going to share this again quickly. At 12 years old, I had what we call an AVM. This is an arterial venous malformation. So this was up in my brain.
Uh-huh.
This is basically like a very small malformation, deformity. I'm not going to
Uh-huh.
use medical terms. I was a gymnast. I hit my head very hard on the bars. I didn't think
Okay.
too much of it, but it possibly, because we can never know for sure, but okay, probably dislodged something in my brain, and then that meant
Uh-huh.
that my brain went on to have a bleed, and the pressure built up, and then my brain vessels exploded. So I had a brain bleed. I was raced into hospital. They couldn't wake me up. I went into hospital, straight into emergency brain surgery, flatlined on the table. And then they brought me back, and then I flatlined again. And then they realized that they couldn't actually complete the surgery because it was quite deep. It's up here, quite deep
Okay.
within my brain, the part that was bleeding. So they did
Uh-huh.
what they could. They put me back together. They said, we'll just
Okay.
get it, let her get stronger, and then we'll work out, another surgery or something like that. So they put me back together. I woke up just over a week later. I was in the critical care unit of the hospital, and I was paralyzed with a whole future ahead of me. And I thought, life is perfect. Life is exactly what it's meant to be for me. So I had this huge gratitude that I was in the position I was in, which sounds crazy. On a spiritual side, when all of this was happening, I was in a place of nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Nothingness isn't even the right word because yeah, nothingness isn't, it's still a thing. I can't even explain it. Then I was in a place of bright white light. There were beings around me. I just felt like this place was glorious. I wasn't able to see features of the beings. I didn't know who they were. And I wasn't allowed to fully come into that place. And then
Okay.
I woke up, and that's when I was in critical care. So that was my personal journey with death. And that really made me believe that life goes on past this realm. I see death more as a transition than
Mm-hmm.
an end point. And for our listeners out there, there is no judgment. We make our own decisions. And that's why I would ask, what does death mean to people? You know, I ask that question a lot. What does death mean to you? Because we all have different beliefs, and it doesn't mean someone's right or wrong, or, we actually don't know. Even after my experience, I can't tell you 100% because what if it was different next time? What if I went a
Exactly.
bit deeper into that experience? What if I was lighter in that experience? So for me, I believe there is definitely something after this world, that it's a transition point. I've had experience with people who died and stayed dead. So my father was killed in a plane accident, and so that's very sudden, and that was just horrific. Like, he meant
Mm.
so much to me. So I can resonate with what you're saying as well. And then that led me to think a lot around death and what it's like for the people who are left behind.
Uh-huh.
I've worked with a lot of families now, and I've worked with families who don't have things in place. So they don't have a will in place. They don't have an advanced care plan, which is how they wish to go at the end, whether they want to be resuscitated, whether they want to be at
Uh-huh.
home in a hospital, who they want around them, all of these things. I've worked with families who have no clue what to do for a funeral ceremony. What would they
Uh-huh.
have wanted? No idea. So they're choosing music that maybe it's just because they like the music. They're choosing how it all comes together. And yeah, I've answered your question in quite a round the houses way. For me, it's just, again, it just comes back to, I think death is such an important topic. Yeah.
Exactly. It is. Thank you for sharing how profound that, because and it is incredible because with NDE, near death experience, actually,
Mm.
that I met the person who coined the term, Raymond Moody.
Raymond Moody. Oh, yes, he's
Yes.
lovely, isn't he? Yes.
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
Yes,
he's so
because here in
kind.
the United States, yeah, they do this conference after death. And I remember I went there many years ago and he talked there and he's amazing. All,
Yes.
all the studies that he has done, it's incredible.
Oh, I
So
know. And I'm
yeah,
so grateful for what he's done, because this was all before the internet. This was all before there wasn't, he coined the term near-death experience. So you couldn't even explain what that was. So, yes, so much gratitude to him. I'm curious
exactly.
to know, you talked about the four things, saying thank you, saying I love you, forgive me,
Forgive me and I forgive you.
I forgive you. Okay, yes. So those are four things. I'm curious, have you got any more insights into the way people feel at the end of their life? What sort of things are people talking about or thinking about right on their final days, final moments?
Okay, I have accompanied people, before dying. And before we were talking about letters legacy, I remembered because I used to be a hospice volunteer. This
Yeah.
was many years ago before my mom, got older, no, and all that because I was her caretaker. And I remember there was this woman that she suffered from ALS, and they called me up, from hospice to go and be with her because she wanted to dictate letters
Oh,
to,
wow.
her family, letters to her church. Kirsty, it was one of the most spiritual experiences I have had. It
Uh-huh.
was so close to my heart to write down those letters that this woman, because with ALS she couldn't use her hands,
Mm, mm,
so she was paralyzed, and it was so deep and so sacred to sit with her and to
mm,
listen what she wanted to say. And she was a lot into gratitude, and the letters for her children, things that she learned from life, about life and the things that they could do to have a good life, living with purpose. So in church, it was to, being thankful for how important they have been, the community, the ministries and all that, how
Mm.
important they were for her. So it was one of the most sacred experiences I have had with people just before dying, because this was just hours before dying. Yeah, that was
Wow.
really, really deep. Now, when we talk about people dying the moments before, it has to do a lot with how the person is. The most beautiful thing that we can have is for the person to be in peace,
Yeah.
to be able to let go, to be able to say goodbyes, to be able to talk, to their loved ones, to have those moments, of saying the
Mm.
things that they never said. Sometimes, asking for
Mm.
forgiveness, absolutely. And that's healing. That's healing for the person who's dying, and that's healing as well for the family, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh, it's fascinating to be with people very close. I don't know, it's just, it makes the way we're living, like it questions everything and it makes a lot of things seem irrelevant or insignificant when we pump them up to be so important. It sort of narrows everything down to the truth, I feel, in those final moments. So, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about grief and loss. We've talked a bit about death. In terms of families, when we lose someone, as we both know personally, when you lose someone who you just love to bits, who's so close to you, the grief is real, the loss is real, the pain is real. You've got some strategies to help people really embrace grief and to make the most out of grief. Are you happy to share a little bit about that?
Absolutely, with all my heart, because grief happens.
Mm,
And I like to define it such as is the natural and unique response to loss. And I like to emphasize that it is unique. Sometimes we live in this society, we tend to compare. People
mm,
compare themselves with this and that, social
mm,
media, people comparing and all that. And first, it will be the best we don't compare, right? To anybody in anything, right?
yeah.
And especially in grief, because sometimes people compare with that person who lost a loved one and see how they're doing and see how I am doing, or others compare them, see how she's doing, and you are still crying and you're still, So it is the best to understand that it is a journey,
Mm,
it's a process. It's not that suddenly I'm here now and suddenly tomorrow I'm like this. It is a process. Grieving is a process. Healing is a process. And the best we can do is to acknowledge grief, to acknowledge it instead of ignoring it. Because I
mm,
have seen it, Kirsty, over and over. Some people come and they say, well, I lost my loved one 10 years ago. And it feels like if it was yesterday,
mm,
because
mm,
something may have happened, a trigger happened, something that brought all those memories and emotions up. And what
mm,
happens is that when that person died, they may have just put, grief on the shelf, put it
mm,
there and continued. What happens is that what we ignore doesn't cease to exist. It is only repressed. And then something happens, a trigger, an anniversary, a date, or someone dying. Something that happens also is that sometimes with a losses from the past that we never processed come to the surface. So you may have like bereavement overload because it
mm,
is too much. So the best thing we can do is to recognize our grief, to acknowledge it, to validate it. What makes me feel this way? To validate every single emotion, because with grief, there are so many emotions. It
mm,
is not that we're sad. We may be angry. We may feel guilty. We may be anxious. We may be scared. We may feel peaceful. So many emotions. We may feel love. So many emotions. So it's so important to Overwhelmed is another one. To feel overwhelmed, to feel stressed out. There's so many emotions. It's like, if we have like an umbrella, no, that we call grief, huge umbrella, so many emotions. So it's important to be mindful with our emotions, stay with them, process them. Either, we write about them. I am a firm believer in writing, and as I said, I like to journal. When my mother died, which was such a deep, painful loss, my mom and my father as well, but they were different. When I was at 12, the other one was at 60. And it was so different because as an adult, as someone who works with grief, who's a thanatologist now, I was going through that. So I was extremely mindful of what I was feeling, of what I was thinking. And that's key. And I want, people who are listening to this to pay attention that what we are thinking is what makes a huge difference on how we deal with our grief. Because one thing is to feel pain. That's natural. Another one is to go into suffering, because the suffering happens based on what we are thinking. If we stay stuck and all those what if, that happens, Kirsty. It happens a lot. What if, and all the things I should, they should have done. I shouldn't have, all those shoulds and what if. Then with that, we go into spiral down.
Yep.
And that causes suffering. So what I always say is, yes, it is natural to feel that pain, and it's important to acknowledge it, to process it. However, if you find yourself suffering because of your thoughts, choose thoughts that make you feel an emotion like thankful for having had that person in your life. Ways that you can honor your loved one, so we can move from that place of suffering to a place of honoring them with love. And we can do it. I've been saying this for years. I lived it with my mom. I lived it. And I share that a lot, in the book. I share so many things that I lived, and I confirmed. I said, wow, yes, this works. We can do it. If I could, reframe, my mindset, if I could do that tweak to my thoughts into something that brought that love, if I could do it in those moments that were so extremely painful, wow, I said, we can do it. It really works. When they say, change your brain, change your life, you are what you think. It is so true.
I believe
Especially
so.
with grief. Yeah. Isn't that happen? Has that happened to you as well?
I think we're all building our future. Every moment, every decision, every where we put our mind, our thoughts, all of it is building our future. And so if we can build positive, the future's going to have more positive in it. Not saying it's all going to be a bed of roses and be la-di-da and happy.
Exactly.
Life is up and down. Yeah. But I really resonate with everything you've said, and I just be kind and gentle. And I think even I'm stuck on those 4 sayings because I think they're so impactful. Let's say them to ourselves. Let's
Yes.
acknowledge how we're feeling. Say them to ourselves as well. I am curious, this is fantastic. You've given us some really nice tips for starting to get through grief. And even saying that just doesn't feel right, because we don't get through and out the other side. We go and we walk hand in hand with grief for the rest of our life. It never goes away. It just changes.
You said something important that I want to emphasize.
Yeah.
Because yes, it goes, we have the moments. So it's up and down, up and down. Grief is not linear. It is
No,
not.
definitely not.
No,
And it doesn't make
absolutely.
sense.
No, right? And that's why they compare it with a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It ups and downs, ups and downs. And also, there is no a timeline. It's not that, okay,
Exactly.
I'm here, then here, stop. I stop grieving. It is not like that.
No.
Because as Paul Rosenblatt, very famous psychologist, and grief expert, grief is recurrent. It is recurrent. So for us, to realize that and to be self-compassionate. to
Mm,
understand ourselves. Oh, this is happening. It is not that I regressed in my grieving process. It's just that it is grief, you know?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this. I feel like you said something at the beginning about we need to acknowledge grief. Let's not hide it away, but let's actually go, this is what's happening and be realistic about it. What about when somebody sees somebody who's lost someone? Do we acknowledge it? If your best friend, or no, that would be too close. You know someone has lost someone and then you see
Uh-huh.
them. What do you think? How do you, a lot of people would ignore it and just not bring it up, whereas other people would bring it, is there any right or wrong? Should we bring up the elephant in the room to the person that's
Ah, I am so
grieving?
glad you're asking this because that's one of the strongest pains the griever experienced. That they want to talk up because we want to talk about our loved ones. We want to talk about them.
Mm,
And when people are just like, they want to change the subject or they don't want to mention it to you because they don't want to hurt you. They don't want to make you sad. It's natural. So they want to talk about their loved ones and other people because they want people in general. No, they have, I always say this, people have good intentions when you're grieving and they
mm,
they make comments that may not help, you know. However,
yeah.
the intention is good because they want to take us away from pain. However, people sometimes don't realize that it's important for us to go through pain. It's the only way. Because if not, we are repressing it. We are faking it, as I say a lot. We are wearing the mask, not the mask
Yep.
COVID, but the mask,
Mm-hmm.
and people are just pretending.
Mm,
And that
mm,
hurts. That makes grief even deeper because then we risk it to, we may stay stuck in grief.
mm.
We may get into the frozen grief, we may get stuck, and we really don't want to do that. So I always suggest my grievers, you know what? Just say, you know what? Thank you for your intention of, helping me or, saying these things. I appreciate it. You know what? I would love to talk about my loved one. And you open your heart, because they don't know how to talk to you. They don't know what to do. People call me sometimes when they go either to a viewing or even a hospital, and they call me, Ligia, what do I say? What do I do?
Mm,
I don't know what to say. I'm
mm,
like, just
mm,
give them a hug. Just give them a hug. I'm here for you. My heart is with you. It's better than to say all those things. Time will heal. And things happen for a reason. People don't like that.
it's
Or
a bit
the
fresh.
class. I know. Or the
Yeah.
classic. I'm sorry. People sometimes don't like that. I'm sorry because sometimes it sounds like automatic.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah. So it,
It's
it is important to acknowledge the elephant in the room, Kirsty, as you said
Yeah,
it.
I
Yes.
think so. I think it's really tricky because, like you say, we don't want to create more pain. We don't want to bring the subject up if they're just keeping things where they can handle them.
Uh-huh.
We're scared to
Yes,
make the situation worse, I think. So I'm
absolutely.
curious to know if someone has lost someone, say somebody's died, how can we support and show care for them from a distance? Should we be showing care for them? Should we be trying to do something? Or should that just be the immediate family and the immediate loved ones? Is there like a distance of where actually just leave them?
Well, it is important for the griever to take in when people want to accompany them. It is beautiful to feel that people care, and even sometimes they don't want to respond to text or to take a phone call or because they are in that space of grieving. But then afterwards, when you notice, that they were there for you, we like it. We appreciate it.
Mm,
I remember
mm,
when my mother died, because with my mom, as I said, she was 100. She was like my baby in the sense of I would
mhm,
just, share pictures of her on Facebook, and she
mm.
was so well known on Facebook, right? And because she loved it, and she would tell me, Hita, say this and say that. She loved it. And because when she died, she was, her mind was, up to part and all that. So after she died and I shared it on Facebook, I received so many comments. And let me
Mm.
tell you, they filled up my heart. I felt accompanied, and it was very, very special. And a lot of
Mm.
people turn to social media because, to have that support. So it becomes sometimes
Yes.
like a support system, like a support group. But it's important to acknowledge and to share. What I feel the most is to be authentic. That's what I say.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be
Okay.
authentic with the person, to say, I'm here if you know that, to offer your help, for example, in things that are happening. Not to say like, okay, call me if you need me. They will not call you. People will not call you.
Yeah,
But
it's
for
true.
example, if you know that your friend has two children, let's say, has two children that they go to school, and your friend is the one who takes children to school, then you can offer that. You know what? For the next month or the next week, if you will, I'm going to take children to school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or you know what? This next week, I'm going to do groceries for you. So
Yeah.
be practical, offering things that they will appreciate it, because it's incredible something that happens to the griever, to many grievers, not to all, because remember, there's nothing that happens to all, right? But when they go to the supermarket, to do groceries, the first days after the person died, it is so painful.
Mm.
It is incredible because when we go to the aisle, I remember my mom used to love eating puddings, like
Yeah.
she would eat it with a spoon. And I remember the first time that I went to the supermarket here and I saw it, I was like, oh, I remember that she loved it. And now, of course, I was not going to buy it. So those things, I have had people, widows also, that they have said to me, Ligia, I never knew how hard it was to go to the supermarket, because now they are not buying food for two. They're
Mm.
only buying for one, you know.
Mm.
So
Mm.
all these things we can offer and they can be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot. You raised an interesting point about social media because I think times have changed now where we do put up things, posts about that. So people know, but if somebody doesn't put up a post, and it can be quite hard, I think, as a griever. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm processing this thought as I talk to you, Lihia.
Uh-huh.
Uh, as a griever, I wonder whether we need to actually try and be open about people wanting to help us, or I don't, is that too much to ask someone who's in grief to think about the people around? That's probably too much. Like I said, I'm just having this thought now. Okay, I'm going to change this. What else can we do? You've got your 11 principles of transformation.
Yes. I want to just answer what you said,
Okay.
because about social media. Social media helps some people, doesn't help others. It depends on our personality. Our personality has a great influence on how we grieve. Our
Mm,
personality, our attitude, all those variables have a great influence on how we grieve. If we have never been into social media, then don't go into social media. If you're not open to share something, they don't do it.
mm,
If you
mm,
love to do it, then if it helps you, then also, and what you can share, because also, we want to protect ourselves, our privacy, whatever. So what feels right with you? That's what I always say. What feels right with you, do it. Is your grief, is your right to grieve, do it. And if people are next to you and they want to help you, it is beautiful. If you also need some time, some me time, not that you're going to get isolated when grieving, but you need some, what we call, Kirsty, me time. It
mm,
is important also. And for others to respect that. I just
mm,
had a seminar here at my center. I have a center in Miami. I had it on Saturday about navigating grief during the holidays. And one of the things that we were talking about is the pressure that sometimes people put on us. but you should come, but you should be here, everybody's going to be here. And sometimes they are not really listening to the
Mm.
needs that the griever has.
Mm.
So that's why it's always good to have that conversation and share what would help you the most. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And it is so personal. It is so
It is.
personal. Yeah. Have you got any? I'm just having a moment here. Do you have any profound thing you want to cover or any profound stories that you're happy to share with us? Or,
Well, as I was saying, the holidays can be a big one, can be very painful, and always to pay attention to create rituals. We can create new traditions. If
mm,
the old traditions feel too painful, you can create new ones. You can create rituals such as, because with rituals, especially with grief and loss, we can express. It's a way to connect it with our loved one. So even lighting a candle, even doing things, putting together like a box. The other day I went to a very well-known place here in United States called Hobby Lobby, and that's like a crafts store.
yeah.
I went with my niece, and we were seeing all these things there, and like creating a box of memory. For example, you can create like a shoebox, and you can decorate it, or you can put paper around. So you can do rituals, you can do things, because that's something that I highly suggest to people, to do things with intention, because grief is not passive, Kirsty. Grief
Mm,
is active, and it
mm,
depends on what we do. So we can do rituals, we can use art to express our emotions, being painting, even if we are not a painter, right? But
yeah.
painting, exactly. Get some those like 8 by 10 canvas, just paint, with
Yeah.
acrylics or aquarella or acrylics, whatever, resonates with you. You can, if you play, an instrument, playing an instrument. If you want to write, you can write poems, you can write
Mm,
lyrics for a song, you can be inspired and write a book. It may be not to be published, but you may want to write a book for your family, talking about
And that's
legacy, what
legacy. I was
words.
just about to say legacy
Yes,
right there.
exactly.
Yep. And
Exactly.
I think when we tap into these things, it's almost like painting or writing, drawing, it could be anything, puts us in a state where we're almost a bit more open. We're almost, it's like our subconscious can deal with something while we're physically doing something. And I think that
Exactly.
that's very healing. So yeah, I mean, we hear a lot about this, don't we? About how it's so healing to paint or to draw or to journal. And I think it's because it puts us in this state, which I think is really helpful. I'm aware we've been talking about grief in the context of death and loss, but I'm also aware that grief is everywhere, every day, with relationships, with losing jobs, with maybe moving house and losing a house, or it could be down to something like losing clothing or having a just there's loss and grief everywhere. It might be within our job, it might be within our family, anything. It's not necessarily death.
I'm so glad you mentioned that as well, because
Yeah.
it is not only losing a loved one to death. No, it can happen, with breakups, relationships,
Yeah.
divorce can happen with, as you said, losing a job, losing when people leave their homeland, losing
Yeah,
your
right.
country of origin, when people they lose their health.
Yeah.
They have been diagnosed with an illness, and it doesn't have to be only a terminal illness.
It could be
It could
anything.
be a condition, a health condition,
Mm,
that you have to change your whole lifestyle. So it's that loss of our assumptive world, and we experienced that, Kirsty, and at a global level, when COVID hit us.
mm,
When COVID hit us, and I talk about that in the book, because I was taken by the multiple losses we experienced, loss of safety, loss of
mm,
security, loss of the world we knew.
mm,
And I am subscribed to this magazine called Psychology Today. And
Ah,
I
yes.
remembered, yes, I remember that maybe 3 or 4 months after, because here in the United States, at least, Miami, it was on March 2020 when it was
Mm,
out, that
mm,
this was COVID and all that, that people didn't know what COVID was.
mm,
So I think it was 3 to 4 months after that, that the cover of the magazine that I tell you about, Psychology Today, had the big word grief on the cover. I remember when I took it, I'm like, oh my God, this had to happen to bring grief, from the back burner,
mm,
because it is happening. It is
mm,
happening. So grief, I had clients that grandparents, they were grieving because they couldn't see their grandchildren. There's so
absolutely.
many things. And the most important thing is to acknowledge it. Because sometimes people say, I am depressed. And you start talking with them, and it is not that you are depressed, you're grieving. So a loss happened, something that you cherished, so dearly, and it's not there anymore. You're grieving that loss. So it's
Mm,
important, to acknowledge, something else that we may grieve, because my other area is gerontology, which is the study of aging. And it's when we get older, it
mm,
depends how we take, how we get older. Some people take it very strong, very strong. And it's the loss of youth, especially living,
yes.
in a society that beauty and youth, and power and all those things. And if you are, getting older and all that thing, some people have it hard. Again, because what represents a loss to someone may not represent loss to somebody else, because we are
Exactly.
unique.
Mm,
Yes,
mm.
because we are unique. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is an important piece of the conversation because I feel like we all experience grief. I'm not going to say on a daily basis, but a regular basis. And it's not to the level of the loss, or perhaps we can't actually define where the griefs come from. You talked about depression, and maybe we just feel a bit lost rather than we've physically
That's
lost something. Maybe we've lost a little piece of ourselves.
Yes,
Makes it
what you said.
real.
Yes, what you said, what? A, a loss that is really real, the loss of identity.
Yes, yes. And I
Yes,
think
when
this
we don't
happens
know
for
who we
so many
are.
people. Exactly.
Yes,
This can happen
yes.
within a job role. If your role changes, you just don't quite know your place, what people expect you to be doing, what you expect of yourself. It can be really hard to navigate that. Another one is a woman when she's pregnant. Suddenly she's
Uh-huh.
wearing different clothes, her body's a different shape, she's feeling different, she wants to eat different food or not eat different food. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that there can be such a feeling of, yeah, missing identity. I don't know who I am right
Yes,
now.
absolutely. And another loss, now talking about women, another loss that can be a loss, another transition, is menopause.
Mm, mm,
Menopause can also be a loss. So there's so many, and the thing is that we just do not acknowledge them. You know that for several years, for 5 years actually, I traveled in the United States nationwide doing a seminar based on the principles that you mentioned, the 11 principles of transformations, the methodology I created, and it was called Transforming Grief and Loss. It was with this company called PESI, PESI, and they offer continuing education credits to mental health professionals. So I
mm,
traveled, many cities, and we would always do this exercise. I would tell them, okay, so let's explore losses that children may experience. And we don't say children experience, because for some may
mm,
not, and for some, yes,
mm,
so may experience. Losses that adolescents may experience, adults may experience, older adults may experience. Oh, Kirsty, we came up with so many, so many. And
mm,
I did it for, I remember the number, 108 cities. In every single city, it so many losses that we
mm,
may encounter, you
mm,
know and how we go through life. At times we may not realize all the losses that we have faced, when we were children and we grow up, because we are so resilient. We are
Mm.
more resilient than we realized, So that was very interesting exercise we did. I loved doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really worth doing. I'm curious about that one. It sounds amazing. Are you going to share some of your principles with us? Are you happy to?
When I wrote my first book on grief, as I told you, it was dedicated to my father's memory. It's called Transform Your Loss, Your Guide to Strength and Hope. I first wrote it in Spanish because that's my native language, and then it was translated into English. And what was it was something like, I don't know, bigger than myself, if I will, because I was writing the book, and it has 60 stories actually of people going through losses, different losses, because this is Transform Your Loss. And I talked about different types of losses, not only the loss of a loved one. So I talked about what grief is, how it is manifested, different dimensions and all that. And then I was like, I want to give something to the reader. I said, that they can do something like strategies, techniques. And suddenly, Kirsty, I started writing. I started writing and writing and writing. And then 11 principles. I just went to the last one. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then I counted them and there were 11. And I'll share this with you. I was so taken. I'm like, I love them because my father died on 11/11,
Oh,
November 11th.
wow. Yeah.
Yes, 1971. And I tell you, I didn't plan it. I just did not. So I was like, oh my God, for me, that was so sacred. And I love my principles. And it is the idea with the principles is that using them, applying them, you are able to transform your loss and transform your life. So for the time that we have left, I will just mention them for you to have an idea how they are, because I do seminars with them, I do workshops, support groups, I have it as an online program. I love my principles because you can apply them any loss, any type of loss, because they can help you. For example, the first one is accept your loss. And when we say accept, and sometimes it's the hardest thing, acceptance, it's not that we're okay, that it happened, we're okay. No, it's just acknowledging the reality. Accept this is what happened. This is my reality. Because unless we accept instead of resist what happened to us, we can do something about it. We can make the decision. So the first one is accept your loss. The second is live your grief, because then it's not that you say acceptance and then you forget about grief. No. Once you realize that you are experiencing a loss, then live your grief, because then we know grief is the natural and unique response to loss. And based on the second principle is my last book, Allow Me to Live My Grief and Heal from the Inside Out. That's based on the second principle. Okay, then the third one is expand your spiritual dimension. And I talk about gratitude, forgiveness, and love. For me, those are the three spiritual tools. Develop your spiritual dimension. The fourth is express your feelings. Express your feelings. Just share how you feel. That is important. Number fifth is share with others. No, and I talk about the value of not being an island, share with others, belonging to support groups, or share with people that, they can understand you, listen to you. We all have a story to tell, so to tell our story. Number six is take care of yourself, because at times when we are grieving, it is very common that we do not want to take care of ourselves. However, we couldn't control the loss, especially when we lose a loved one. However, we can always control what do we do with ourselves to take control of our bodies, our mind, our spirit. So number seven is do rituals. Embrace the rituals. Do something that helps you keep that connection with your loved one, or to help you, grieve and release all those emotions, especially if you're going through different types of losses. Number 8 is live the now. It's based on mindfulness. Live the now. Instead of dwelling on what happened, in the past, or worrying about the future, not planning, worrying about the future, live the now, live the present. Number 9 is modify your thoughts, because we can always change our thoughts. So modify your thoughts. Number 10 is rebuild your world. So after experiencing the loss, then, it's like when you start picking up the pieces and you start rebuilding your world. And number 11th, the 11th principle is visualize the life you want. So those are the principles. And the idea is for people to acknowledge their loss, to process their grief, and then to integrate all those different elements, gratitude, forgiveness, express your feelings, sharing, take care of yourself, all those things, you add them so they can help you find meaning and purpose again, basically.
Wow, that's amazing. As you were going through, I was going, yep. This is good. This is good. Absolutely. So that's just a short little checklist right there. If you're listening and you're feeling like that could be really helpful for you, notes are down below. Go check out Ligia's website and check out her books and what's available there. I feel like there's so many practical things that you've given us in this conversation. So thank you so much for that.
It has been very, very special to share time with you.